In May of 1673, French-Canadian explorer Louis Jolliet, along with French Jesuit missionary Father Marquette, departed from northern Michigan with 2 canoes and 5 voyageurs of French Indian ancestry. They traveled through Lake Huron and Lake Michigan and into Green Bay to explore and map the northern portion of the Mississippi River Valley. Let's continue a deep dive into the significance of the Mississippi River.
The discovery of the Mississippi, France and England in North America. Discovery of the Great West, 1672 to 1675. Marquette and Joliet sent to find the Mississippi. Departure, Green Bay, Wisconsin. Louis Joliet was a suitable agent for the discovery of the Mississippi and the discovery and occupation of the interior. The governor of Canada, Count Frontenac, accepted his counsel. Louis Joliet was the son of a wagon maker in the service of the Company of the 100 Associates, then owners of Canada. He was born at Quebec in 1645 and was educated by the Jesuits. When still very young, he resolved to be a priest. He received the tonsure and the minor orders at the age of 17. 4 years after, he is mentioned with especial honor for the part he bore in the disputes in philosophy, at which the dignitaries of the colony were present, and in which the intendant himself took part. Not long after, he renounced his clerical vocation and turned fur trader. In what we know of Joliet, there is nothing that reveals any salient or distinctive trait of character, any especial breadth of view or boldness of design. He appears to have been simply a merchant, intelligent, well-educated, courageous, hardy, and enterprising. Though he had renounced the priesthood, he retained his partiality for the Jesuits, and it is more than probable that their influence had aided not a little to determine one of their number, Jacques Marquette, was chosen to accompany him. Mississippi Indians feasted the Frenchmen with buffalo meat, bear's oil, and white plums, and gave them a variety of doubtful information, including the agreeable but delusive assurance that they would reach the mouth of the river in 10 days. It was, in fact, more than 1,000 miles distant. They resumed their course and again floated down the interminable monotony of river, marsh, and forest. Day after day passed on in solitude, and they had paddled some 300 miles since their meeting with the Indians, when, as they neared the mouth of the Arkansas, they saw a cluster of wigwams on the west bank. Their inmates were all astir, yelling a war whoop, snatching their weapons, and running to the shore to meet the strangers, who, on their part, called for succor to the Virgin. In truth, they had need of her aid, for several large wooden canoes, filled with Indians, were putting out from the shore, above and below them, to cut off their retreat, while a swarm of headlong young warriors waded into the water to attack them. The current proved too strong, and failing to reach the canoes of the Frenchmen, one of them threw his war club, which flew over the heads of the startled travelers. Meanwhile, Marquette had not ceased to hold up his calumet, to which the excited crowd gave no heed, but strung their bows and notched their arrows for immediate action. When at length the elders of the village arrived, saw the peace pipe, restrained the ardor of the youth, and urged the Frenchmen to come ashore. Marquette and his companions complied, trembling, and found a better reception than they had reason to expect. One of the Indians spoke a little Illinois and served as an interpreter. A friendly conference was followed by a feast of sagamite and fish, and the travelers, not without sore misgivings, spent the night in the lodges of their entertainers. Early in the morning they embarked again, and proceeded to a village of the Arkansas tribe, about 8 leagues below. Notice of their coming was sent before them by their late hosts, and as they drew near they were met by a canoe, in the prow of which stood a naked personage, holding a calumet, singing and making gestures of friendship. On reaching the village, which was on the east side, opposite the mouth of the river Arkansas, they were conducted to a sort of scaffold before the lodge of the war chief. The space beneath them had been prepared for the reception, the ground being neatly covered with rush mats. On these they were seated. The warriors sat around them in a semicircle. Then the elders of the tribe, and then the promiscuous crowd of villagers standing and staring over the heads of the more dignified members of the assembly. All the men were naked, but to compensate for the lack of clothing, they wore strings of beads in their noses and ears. The women were clothed in shabby skins and wore their hair clumped in a mass behind each ear. By good luck, there was a young Indian in the village who had an excellent knowledge of Illinois, and through him Marquette endeavored to explain the mysteries of Christianity and to gain information concerning the river below. To this end, he gave his auditors the presents indispensable on such occasions, but received very little in return. They told him that the Mississippi was infested by hostile Indians, armed with guns procured from white men, and that they, the Arkansas, stood in such fear of them that they dared not hunt the buffalo, but were forced to live on Indian corn, of which they raised 3 crops a year. During the speeches on either side, food was brought in without ceasing, sometimes a platter of sagamite or mush, sometimes of corn boiled whole, sometimes a roasted dog. The villagers had large earthen pots and platters, made by themselves with tolerable skill, as well as hatchets, knives, and beads, gained by traffic with the Illinois and other tribes in contact with the French or Spaniards. All day there was feasting without respite, after the merciless practice of Indian hospitality, but at night some of their entertainers proposed to kill and plunder them, a scheme which was defeated by the vigilance of the chief, who visited their quarters and danced the calumet dance to reassure his guests. The travelers now held counsel as to what course they should take. They had gone far enough, as they thought, to establish one important point, that the Mississippi discharged its waters not into the Atlantic or Sea of Virginia, nor into the Gulf of California or Vermilion Sea, but into the Gulf of Mexico. They thought themselves nearer to the mouth than they actually were, the distance being still about 700 miles, and they feared that if they went farther they might be killed by Indians or captured by Spaniards, whereby the results of their discovery would be lost. Therefore, they resolved to return to Canada and report what they had seen. They left the Arkansas village and began their homeward voyage on the 17th of July. It was no easy task to urge their way upward in the heat of midsummer against the current of the dark and gloomy stream, toiling all day under the parching sun and sleeping at night in the exhalations of the unwholesome shore, or in the narrow confines of their birchen vessels anchored on the river. Marquette was attacked with dysentery. Languid and well-nigh spent, he invoked his celestial mistress, as day after day and week after week they won their slow way northward. At length they reached the Illinois, and entering its mouth, followed its course, charmed as they went with its placid waters, its shady forests, and its rich plains, grazed by the bison and the deer. They stopped at a spot soon to be made famous in the annals of Western discovery. This was a village of the Illinois, then called Kaskaskia, a name afterwards transferred to another locality. A chief with a band of young warriors offered to guide them to the Lake of the Illinois, that is to say, Lake Michigan. Thither they repaired, and coasting its shores, reached Green Bay by the end of September, after an absence of about 4 months, during which they had paddled their canoes somewhat more than 2,500 miles. Marquette remained to recruit his exhausted strength, but Jolliet descended to Quebec to bear the report of his discovery to Count Frontenac. Fortune had wonderfully favored him on his long and perilous journey, but now she abandoned him on the very threshold of home. Jolliet's misfortune. At the foot of the rapids of La Chesnaye, and immediately above Montreal, his canoe was overset. 2 of his men and an Indian boy were drowned. All his papers were lost, and he himself narrowly escaped. In a letter to Frontenac, the governor of Canada, he speaks of the accident as follows: "I had escaped every peril from the Indians. I had passed 42 rapids, and was on the point of disembarking, full of joy at the success of so long and difficult an enterprise, when my canoe capsized. After all the dangers seemed over, I lost 2 men and my box of papers, within sight of the first French settlements which I had left almost 2 years before. Nothing remains to me but my life, and the ardent desire to employ it on any service which you may please to direct." Marquette spent the winter and the following summer at the mission of Green Bay, still suffering from his malady. In the autumn, however, it abated, and he was permitted by his superior to attempt the execution of a plan to which he was devotedly attached, the founding, at the principal town of the Illinois, of a mission to be called the Immaculate Conception, a name which he had already given to the river Mississippi.
I'm Mark Vinette, and I hope you're enjoying the ride.